Bob Hunter is the chairman and interim CEO of the Wolfpack, and he joins us. First of all, Mr. Hunter, nice to chat with you again, sir. How are you?
Roger, it has been a while since our old Oshawa General days. So, great to be on the show. Thank you.
And wonderful to hear you involved with the Wolfpack. So people who don't know, and most people in this market certainly know your background with MLSE, your time as an executive in Skydome. You've seen so much of Toronto sports. And Bob, now we've got another, looks like, pardon the baseball analogy, a real home run with this Wolfpack franchise. How has this team been as dominant and gotten so good so quickly?
Well, through our GM in the UK, Brian Noble, and with Brian McDermott here, just the talent pool that those two guys have put together is absolutely amazing. And then you've got a very, very strong team that's performing at a very elite level at the moment. I mean, 24-1, and we got a couple of more to go, and then the playoffs. So everyone's really excited.
Well, as they should be, and it's a great story. And, Bob, like you mentioned the executive and building the team and getting it up, which is one thing. But the fact that the team, you talk about, and, you've been involved in sports in your great career for such a long period of time in Toronto, it is very unique that, you're competing like against international teams all the time. Just talk about some of the challenges of that.
Well, let alone the travel is one of them. As we bring the teams over for all of our home games, and actually having a second base in the UK, and where we obviously travel for all of our away games, it is challenging from just a logistics standpoint, and needless to say, very expensive. But, we're just quite excited about being, how would I say, close to the elite league. If we can get through this year, we get moved up again for the second time to the Super League, and then it's a whole new level of competition. Athletes are better, higher paid. It's the Premier League, so we're quite excited about that opportunity.
So let's talk about the significance of that from the business model and what that means in terms of developing the sport and getting people excited about it. Because one thing, Bob, that we find all the time is if a Toronto-based team, Canadian-based team, it does not matter, gets really, really successful against the best. We saw it. You saw it firsthand with the Blue Jays. We've seen it with the Raptors. You get to a point of competing in that level of competition, the interest in the sport rises exponentially. I got to believe that's your hope, if indeed that's the case this year.
Yeah, well, we've seen it this year, Roger, and as the 19 in a row record that we hold right now, as that comes to fruition, it's just a matter of more and more people talking about it. It's a wonderful atmosphere. We have a small building. It only holds 10,000 people. But when it's full, and it's been full almost every game recently with the way the team's playing, people talk, and that's how word of mouth is going to be our future. And so, we think that taking it again to a higher level of rugby itself next year, hopefully in Super League, we're going to be able to create a lot more and a lot more new fans. So it's going to be exciting.
Bob Hunter is with us, chairman, interim CEO of the Toronto Wolfpack. I'm Roger Lajoie, and the Wolfpack, certainly one of the great stories on a 19-game run. They have been near the top of their league, and trying to get promoted to the Super League, and are a great story playing at Lamport Stadium and getting great crowds as well. So, Bob, the challenges then, and I say this in the fondest way, you're an old school guy. You've done a great job in terms of promoting and marketing and being an executive at both at back in the day Skydome and with MLSE. But the challenges of taking a sport that, although has a decent degree of popularity, I don't think there's any question about that, and making it more, dare I say, mainstream. Talk about that challenge, Bob, and how you really want to try to approach that, because that's a tough one.
Well, it is, because, as you know, there are hotbeds of rugby around the country. And, it's really a matter of us investing and developing at the community level. There's a lot of club rugby around, but, pro rugby has never really been played in this country. So, and that's generally how you build a fan base. You get more and more kids playing it, more and more kids interested in it, and that brings kids, parents, and a solid fan base going forward. So, yeah, Roger, I would say my biggest challenge is figuring out how do we fit as a niche sport in a very, very, as you know, clustered sports market. I mean, it's a great sports market, but there's just a lot going on.
Well, there's no doubt about it. We had a couple of people from the Toronto Arrows in with us last night, Bob, as they get ready, and Team Canada with the Rugby World Cup, and they're playing actually now as we speak at Tim Hortons Field. And you know, you talk about the guys who are trying to find their way in the sport and taking it to the next level. I got to believe, even though the Wolfpack is a different entity than that, and I don't want to confuse the audience that maybe doesn't have the understanding of it that you and I do, but the fact if Canada can compete at the international level and have a great Rugby World Cup, I mean, they're in the same group with the All Blacks, for heaven's sakes. We've seen it with so many sports, Bob. All of a sudden, everybody, in the Olympics, everybody's a luge fan, right? If Canada's doing well in luge.
No, we are more than happy to welcome many bandwagon jumpers, and and we hope to create that. And you know, and it's disappointing. I know in the first year of the team, we had 2 Canadian players, but we haven't for the last 2 years. There would be nothing better than to have a half a dozen. And I'm sure they would be national team players, but half a dozen pros on our team playing that from Canadian cities. It's where we want to build the sport as well. You know, the UK, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa put out some amazing, amazing athletes, but we're getting there in Canada.
And I think that's important, especially I think too, you know, you want to get the grassroots level and involved. And when you see the sport growing at the high school level, and it all starts, you know, the best way to get people involved in the sport, I guess the best example, it's more of an individual sport, but we saw it with tennis and golf, Bob, is when, Milos starts doing well in tennis on the international stage. Here comes some more Canadians, and that will afford you the opportunity to have the kind of players and local, you know, talent that builds it. But in the meantime, that you're competing under a Toronto franchise in that, I think that's got to be exciting as all heck. And boy, nothing beats winning, Bob. Doesn't matter what the sport is, right?
Roger, you've got it. You've got it. And again, the team and the coaching staff are so focused now on getting through these playoffs and winning the £1 million game, and then jumping up to the elite league. That's the sole purpose and goal this year. And again, that will help business. It'll help our sponsorships, help our marketing of tickets, and just get a good foothold in the Toronto marketplace.
So let's talk about what has to happen for that to happen, Bob. Like, talk about the league. I know the team's record is phenomenal, how that plays out, the playoffs, and how are you going to qualify for the Elite League?
Well, so we wrap up on the 7th of September. That's our last league game. We then, given the obvious amazing standings in the league, get a bye the first week. We play our first home game on the 22nd. And if it's an interesting format. If we lose that, we then play again, I think, on the 29th. And the winner coming out of that game plays in the championship game, which is October the 5th. Now, we should be able to win that game on the 22nd, and then we automatically go to the championship on the 5th.
Well, that's certainly within your grasp, without question. So that's exciting. Let's talk a little bit about the atmosphere that's down there. I do some teaching at Ryerson University, and a couple of my students have been involved with the franchise in the 3 years it's been around. And they keep telling me that, you know, the experience, the supporters and everything else is maybe rugby is not the mainstream sport in Canada yet that they want it to be, but the in-game experience and the supporters and the people that are there, Bob, you're getting some casual fans, but I'm told you also got some diehards who really love it, and that's where the atmosphere comes from, right?
Well, and, you know, as you can imagine, we have a lot of English, Australians, New Zealanders, anyone who's sort of grown up with rugby as a principal sport. So we have a lot of international fans that just live in Toronto. The casual fan, yes, we're focused like many at the male and female 20 to 35-year-olds. I mean, that's kind of where we see our future. But yet the fans are very intelligent to the game and very, very knowledgeable of the game. And I think that's what's been most impressive is that they are, I would say they're half diehards and they're half trying to figure out, if rugby's for them.
So what's the selling point, do you think? I asked the guys this last night from the Toronto Arrows, and curious as to your thing. So how do you sell the game of rugby? And one thing, I think they made quite clear is they liken it to the fact this is a sport Canadians should like because of our love of hockey, i.e. it's tough, it's physical, let's call it what it is, especially when it's the men playing. It's a real man's game, and I say that with full respect. And it is a tough physical game to play. But is that how you sell it? How do you get people? And then let's say they come down there. There's the equal problem. I was up at the cricket in Brampton recently, Bob. Great event down there as well, and they had the same kind of challenge. The diehards know exactly what it is, but the casual fan needs to be educated on the sport as well as the significance of the game.
Well, and we've done a lot of trial and I'll call sampling over the last 2 years. And I think, again, winning has certainly helped. We're getting more media attention than we certainly did in those first 2 years. That we're not mainstream as of yet, but that will also help. And I think word of mouth, Roger, is a big, big deal. I mean, we don't advertise a tremendous amount, but just being out there, being on King Street is actually a big advantage to us. So it's really a matter of continuing to sort of pound the social media circles and just really, really try and get our brand out there. And as you said, it's a very, very enjoyable sport to watch and a very physical sport to watch. But and I think that's what people find quite interesting.
Bob, and this is a frank question, is the model sustainable in terms of like Toronto being the only, having to play, as you've already mentioned, and bring in teams from England and the travel costs that are involved in this? Can it work? That's one of the things. I just look at it and I'm just trying to get my head around, how do you manage to make this financially viable?
Well, I think it's a long-term investment without a doubt. I mean, there has been chatter in the last little while about potential franchises in Ottawa and New York. And I must admit that I'm not up to speed as exactly where they stand with the Rugby Football League. But the reality is that it is challenging, without a doubt. And, David Argyle has a significant investment already. And it's going to be somewhat painful for the next couple of years. But I really believe that through a magical formula of winning and building fan interest, being out there aggressively in the community, that we can get our brand out there to the point where you can actually make it viable.
Well, there's not much doubt that the winning has certainly come big, and the Wolfpack are a story in Toronto sports. Their next game at Lampert Stadium is next Saturday, August 31st, 1 o'clock, against the Barrow Raiders. You can get all ticket information at Ticketmaster and as well at TorontoWolfpack.com. That's the team's website. Bob Hunter, Chairman, Interim CEO of the Toronto Wolfpack, joining us to chat about it. Bob, I'm delighted to talk with you again. Very best of luck, and I got to get down there before the season ends and see for myself this great stuff, and I encourage our listeners to do that. All the best to you, sir.
Roger, I really, really enjoyed that. Always good chatting with you, and best of luck to you.
Thank you, sir. Bob Hunter joining us, Class Act Chairman, Interim CEO of the Toronto Wolfpack.